What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Neighborhood Podcast. One of the hosts of the podcast. My name is Kyle Dabro, and in today's segment, we're going to go over the upcoming Game 6 that's going to take place Friday night between the New York Knicks and the Miami Heat. Just to give you guys a summary of where we're at in this series right now, the Miami Heat lead the series 3-2. Looking back at Game 5, that game did take place at the Garden. The Knicks were able to keep their playoff run alive, winning Game 5 by the score of 112-103. The Knicks were in control of that game throughout most of that game in particular, but there was a point where a 19-point lead for the Knicks got down to a 2-point lead for New York, just based off of Miami clawing back in that game. Yet nonetheless, the Knicks were able to close out Game 5 in the Garden and keep their playoff run alive. So going into this Game 6, it's a pivotal game for both teams. If the Knicks win, they force a Game 7. If the Heat win, they go to the Eastern Conference Finals. So Kev, to kick this one to you, who do you think is going to win Game 6 between the New York Knicks and the Miami Heat?
Well, I mean, the thing is, both teams played aggressive. Obviously, each of them had their quarters where they struggled. New York struggled in the first quarter. Miami was kind of struggling a little bit more in the second quarter to where New York made that run, that 36-point second quarter where they exploded. But I mean, I'm just looking at the key factor for the Knicks right now. The momentum shifted, although the lead dwindled relatively quickly in that second half. New York was able to show some fight, some grit to hang on to that lead. I told Kyle as the game was happening, if they would have choked and lost that game, I'm pretty sure New York would have went up in flames and Madison Square Garden would have no longer existed. But thankfully, that didn't happen, and the Knicks were able to hold on. But the key thing here is Julius Randle, despite getting hit in the face, in the eye, to where that eye ended up being swollen the rest of the game, he showed up for the first time all series. Julius Randle didn't have the greatest stat line in the world, but he had 24 points. He had 4 turnovers, but he also had 5 assists, 5 rebounds. He was able to be a contributing factor in that offense to where he was effective, and he broke even in the plus-minus scale, so he just was at a 0. Normally, he is significantly in the negative. Normally, he is very inefficient from the field, and normally he turns the ball over at a higher rate, albeit 4 turnovers is still a lot for a predominant ball handler like Julius, but still, they were able to overcome that, and he was able to put up points when it mattered most. Jalen Brunson has been hot all postseason long, goes for 38, 9, and 7. RJ Barrett, since they came back to the Garden in the Cleveland series, has had an incredible postseason. He goes for another 26-point game and goes for 7 boards. As long as that trio can stay consistent, and I'm not asking Julius to go for 30-some-odd points, go for a triple-double, or anything of that sort, but if he understands that he has to divulge that majority of the offense to Jalen, let him dictate the flow of the game, let him bring the ball up, let him control the offense. I think, and again, this is my personal opinion, I think the Knicks can force a Game 7. On the other side, Miami didn't have the worst game in the world. I'm looking at the numbers. Again, I saw the game, but outside of Max Strus hitting 4 field goals from behind the arc and Duncan Robinson catching fire in that fourth quarter, Miami wasn't really able to knock down a lot of threes, which has been their deciding factor, which has been their key in this postseason run, is knocking down those clutch shots. I mean, Kevin Love was 0 of 7 from 3. Jimmy Butler didn't take 1. Gabe Vincent was 0 of 3. Bam Adebayo doesn't take those, but he was 0 of 1. Caleb Martin was shot 50% from the field there. He was 2 of 4. And then Kyle Lowry was 2 of 8. So the thing that led the Heat into this run was keeping them from this game. Now, again, Duncan catches fire in that second half, majority in that fourth quarter to bring the Heat back. Bam Adebayo has some clutch field goals as well as Jimmy Butler having some clutch steals. But overall, the Knicks have all the momentum. The pressure is on Miami. They got to win on their home floor, or that goes back to the Garden, that electric atmosphere. And again, if Julius Randle and the supporting cast of the New York Knicks can find a way to just play efficient basketball, they don't need to have a 3-point barrage, but they do need to cut those turnovers in half. And I do believe that there are some pieces on this Knicks team that, despite winning this game, they didn't necessarily show up. Mitchell Robinson isn't exactly known for points, but he only had 8. Then you talk about Obi Toppin, somebody that has come in relief for Julius Randle a lot. He only had 2 points. Josh Hart was completely ineffective in this game. He had 3 fouls very early, pretty much walked off the court to have to kind of calm down in the locker room, and he didn't come back until, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, late in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter. he was completely thrown off his rhythm. He was not able to get into an offensive groove, and he only played 9 minutes. And that's been the spark plug for the Knicks the entire playoffs. So, again, as a native New Yorker, as somebody who wants to see the Knicks win, I think that this was the formula to succeed. Get to the free throw line and get Julius Randle going early. But again, Miami has been a very consistent team. Jimmy Butler has willed this team past the point of what everybody thought because of them beating the number one seeded Milwaukee Bucks. But if I had to put a guess on it, if I had to make a choice, I believe the Knicks will force a game 7 and beat Miami in Miami.
I'm actually going to go with the Heat in this one. And looking back at that game 5, Kev, let's be honest here for a second. Really, that second and third quarter stretch from the Knicks was essentially the spark that got them to that 19-point lead in the second half. But even despite the fact that Miami had a poor shooting night across the board, especially when it came to their three-point shots. I mean, before they really went on that decent stretch of hitting three-point shots behind the three-point line, Kev, they were struggling. Just not one person in particular, just the whole team was struggling to knock down threes. And that fourth quarter is definitely where it got interesting when they cut that Knicks lead to 2 points, just because Duncan Robinson was hitting shots, even Kyle Lowry was knocking down some shots, and it just seemed like the pressure for the Knicks was palpable based off of, I think, the Garden knowing the situation at hand, and you could just feel there was some legitimate tension within the Garden when Miami got that deficit to only 2 points. So going into Game 6, I think the one thing that's going to be improved when it comes to Miami is their three-point percentage. I think when it comes to the amount of threes that it took in Game 5, which was somewhere around 40 to 45, they may drop that total a little bit, but I think they're going to get a higher shooting percentage. I don't think that they're going to have another 30% performance behind the three-point line. And really, that shooting percentage was really just bolstered by the fourth quarter. I think if they get better shots across the board and they're knocking them down more consistently, they could probably hit somewhere around maybe the high 30s, maybe even the low 40s behind the three-point line. And I think that's going to serve them well if that is actually the case going into Game 6. So overall, I think Game 6 is going to be a very competitive game. Game 5 lived up to expectations as far as I'm concerned. The Knicks needed to save their season with that Game 5 win in the Garden. They were able to do that. It's just, when it comes to the Knicks, they haven't shown this ability to be able to go on the road against Miami and beat them in Miami. And until I see that, I'm not really going to bank on it at this point, because when I look at the Knicks, I can't question what Jalen's going to give you. Jalen's going to be out there pretty much the entire game. I would probably say somewhere around 45 to playing the full 48 minutes. But when it comes to Julius Randle, this is going to be the X factor for the Knicks. He has to show up. And like Kev had already stated, Julius finally had a decent game in this series. Hell, you could even extrapolate it to the whole playoffs at this point, putting up almost 25 points in Game 5. I don't know if that's going to happen in Game 6. And, when you look at Game 5 in particular, when it comes to Julius Randle, that may just be an anomaly. I'm not banking on Julius Randle hitting that same point mark again. And more than likely, I think he's going to relatively struggle, which is something that we've seen from him, not only in this series, but in the playoffs as well. That means that some other guys within the Knicks are going to have to step up. Is that going to be Josh Hart? Is that going to be Mitchell Robinson? Is that going to be RJ Barrett? I think RJ Barrett is definitely going to be a focal piece in this equation for the Knicks. But they're going to have to get a third option. I just don't think Julius is going to be that third option. They're going to have to look to Josh Hart. I would say Emmanuel Quickley, but I don't think Quickley's going to play in this game. He sprained his ankle a couple games back, and I think he's listed as doubtful going into Game 6. So when I look at the Knicks, they definitely have an opportunity to win this game. I don't want to make it seem like this is just Miami in a blowout. It's just, I think more times than not, I'm going to side with the Heat in this one, just because even despite the fact that the Heat lost by 9 points against the Knicks on the road in the Garden in Game 5, they almost won that one. They almost stole that one in the Garden and wrapped this series up in 5. And I think with that home crowd behind them, I think that they're just going to get an inspired performance from the entire team. I think Jimmy's going to have a more effective night. Granted, he has been limited since that ankle roll in the first game of the series. There's no doubt in my mind that we're not seeing Jimmy at 100%. But I think Jimmy could still go out there and get somewhere around maybe 20, 25 points, knock down some key jump shots throughout the game to give Miami a spark. I think overall their 3-point percentage is going to be improved compared to game 5. And I wouldn't be surprised if Miami does a better job of trying to attack the paint and try to make an effort to get to the free throw line. You could definitely tell in game 5, the Knicks made a concerted effort to get to the free throw line. I think the Knicks damn near doubled up the Heat in free throw attempts in game 5. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami gets into a situation or gets into a mindset where we are going to drive towards the rim. If we get foul calls, we're going to knock down some free throws at the free throw line. I think that's going to be their name of the game. And the one thing that Miami's done relatively well in this series is play decent defense against the Knicks. I would say that game 5 was a little bit of an anomaly because they gave up over 110 points. But there have been times where the Knicks have relatively struggled shooting shots against Miami. And it's simply just because Miami's playing pretty solid defense across the board. So I think this is going to be a competitive game because the Knicks have everything to play for at this point. They're playing for their season at this point. But I think Miami's going to do just enough to get by. And I'm going to say they win this one by about 5-6 points. I think this is going to come right down to the wire. But I think at the end of the day, I think the Knicks are just going to miss some shots within like the last minute or so. And I think the Heat are going to win this game at the free throw line. And with that said, I've got the Heat advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Knicks will be bounced out of the playoffs at that point.